In the news this week, has Mark McGowan got it right? Our exclusive news poll reveals whether the government's budget has you as its priority.
Our kids deserve better treatment. Human rights activists protest at Banksia Hill Detention Centre following riots. Housing funding labelled as a sugar hit as welfare agencies highlight WA's long-term issues. And later, Dr Andrew Miller's comment.
This is The Evening News with Ivan Loom and Maliva Thorne.
Good evening. Money has been thrown around by governments across the nation this week as the federal and state budgets prioritise cost of living, housing, health and mental health. An exclusive WAMN news poll gave viewers the option to rank 15 different issues, from the most important to the least. Health and mental health came in at number 1, housing and homelessness was second, and the cost of living and household charges were third. These results were followed by aged care, law and order, education and so on. Public transport and infrastructure and climate change were 10th and 14th on the list. Although the result showed the McGowan government tops the 3 budget focuses in our viewers' wishes, close to 80% still don't believe the government has the right spending priorities. So what does the government has to say about our WAMN news poll results? We've went to the budget lockup to examine the details.
We're tackling these issues straight on, and that's why the issues that you've raised, they are key issues in our budget: cost of living, health system, housing. But of course, and I think for young people we've talked about, they have a real concern about climate change, and this is a huge investment. $3 billion to help decarbonise our southwest grid.
Political commentator Peter Kennedy joins us exclusively. Peter, thanks for your time. Our viewers' expectations, top 3 priorities are there except for climate change. And the government says housing, health and everything else have top priority. So comparing that to our news poll, did the government get it right?
Oh, pretty much. The household relief was there in power prices, for instance, and also the increase in household charges has been kept relatively low. So the government's done a good job there. With regard to housing, it's a matter of resources. The building workers, for instance, and the price of materials. It can build as many houses as it possibly can, but it's got to keep the costs in mind. And with regard to mental health, a very strong issue, and the government has seemed to be responding to it. There are some areas that the government doesn't respond to, or hasn't, and that includes wages for some public sector workers, including nurses. But the government's problem there is that if it loosens the purse strings too much, then those sort of charges, those costs are built in to the system, and if the money from, say, iron ore and other royalties falls away, the government gets caught and would have to have deficit budgets. So it's got to be cautious in that area. I mean, too cautious, I know, too cautious for people in those sectors, but that's the overriding principle of how the government sets its budget. So with regard to the major areas that we've mentioned, you know, housing and those sorts of things, government has done a good job. On the borderline areas, then it'll never be spending enough. But that's the challenge.
Housing is one of both WAMN viewers and the WA government's top concerns. However, in this year's budget, the government are giving $3 billion to fight climate change and $2.7 billion to healthcare, while housing only allocates around $750 million. Why is that?
Well, it depends on the resources that you have to devote to the housing sector. If you spend too big in housing, what you might do is just push up costs, and the costs of a house goes through the roof because you're throwing too much money at it, and the resources to build the houses are not there. The workforce, the materials. If you throw huge amounts of money at it, the costs of those things or the price of those things can just go through the roof. So it's a matter of moderating your aims, pitching your budget according to the resources that you have, and that you don't overstretch those resources. I mean, look, it's demand and supply.
The Anglicare CEO says this is a sugar hit, a short-term solution to a long-term problem. What are your thoughts?
Well, look, some sectors you'll never satisfy. That's one of the challenges of government, and everybody, every lobby group believes that its area is absolutely crucial, and they've got to lobby hard. It's a pressure issue on government. The squeaky wheel gets the most oil, and that's why the pressure goes on, especially from the welfare agencies. So it's a balancing act. A terrific balancing act, a challenging balancing act for government to try and satisfy the various competing interests. And it won't satisfy all those competing interests satisfactorily as far as they are concerned, but the government's got to try and get the balance right.
Finally, what's your overall score for Mark McGowan's budget?
Well, I think they have got most things correct. They're throwing money around, but they're not throwing it around carelessly. They are targeting the areas that are receiving the main benefits, and I think they are the important areas. Housing particularly, but again, housing has to be tailored according to the resources that are available so that costs don't go through the roof. But by and large, I'd give the government a tick for this budget. I'd give them close to 8 out of 10.
And you can read the full story, only available now on the WAMN Extra News Club. Peter Kennedy, thanks for your time. Have a great weekend.
Pleasure, Ivan.
This week, anyone was talking about the WA government's latest budget, and particularly what it means to young people doing it tough during the current housing and cost of living crisis. I was joined by Housing Minister John Carey, who answered questions on behalf of the McGowan government.
The overall budget is about increasing housing and land supply. And what we know is this: we need to increase housing across the spectrum. So if we're increasing housing in one section of the continuum, that benefits everyone, including international students. We've already announced previously assistance to international students, but in this budget, we're making a $750 million injection or increase in housing, homelessness and lands. That includes, for example, a new announcement to lift the stamp duty rebate on infill and apartments. So what we know is international students often want to live in apartments close to universities, and we all know that we need more apartments, more infill. So on top of planning reform, on top of an infrastructure headworks fund, in today's budget, we've announced that we're lifting the stamp duty rebate and bringing it forward as an upfront concession to $650,000. So if you're buying an apartment up to $650,000, there is a concession on stamp duty of 100%.
You mentioned homelessness. Obviously, building houses and apartments is one way to address the crisis, but at the end of the day, it's a lot more than people just not having a home. There's issues with drugs, mental health that impact people being homeless. So how's the government going to address that?
That's a good point, and you're absolutely right. We understand it's not just about providing a roof over their head for rough sleepers, it's also about intensive wraparound support services. So it's called the Housing First approach, and that's where we provide a roof, but we also provide access to those sorts of services, whether it's mental health, whether it's alcohol, whether it's drug rehabilitation, but try to support their tenancies. So in this budget, we've announced that we're expanding our pilot program, which is called the Supported Landlord Model, which is about providing housing and then access to support services. So we're transferring, or we're expanding that program to regional Western Australia.
On a different note, what does the budget give to young people? What should they know?
Well, I think overall, first of all, that this budget is at its core tackling issues that are key concerns to West Australians and young people. And when you speak to people and young people, cost of living is a key issue at the front of people's mind. So for any young person that has a household, living in an apartment by themselves, shared accommodation, but there's someone still on that household electricity bill, then they will receive a $400 credit. Now, that's significant. That is a real investment, that is real relief. That will be provided over 2 cycles. There's additional funding for those vulnerable households. They will receive an $826 credit. So those who are, for example, concession card holders, and there's a full list that we can provide you. So cost of living is front and centre, but there are other measures like our free Sunday public transport, which means a young person jumping on to a train on one Sunday each month will have access to free public transport. There's also our assistance for young people who might be in training as nurses or in other areas in regional Western Australia. We're providing funding for allowances and assistance there. We're also providing a $2,000 completion fee for people, and often young people, who are completing their apprenticeships. There's funding for mental health services. So there's a range of different portfolios, but at its heart is cost of living relief, and that will assist young people who are in a household and they receive a power bill.
For example, myself, I'm living at university accommodation, so technically my utilities are included in the university payments. Who will benefit from that payment in that regard?
Well, the credit is for households, so I want to be very clear. Obviously, it doesn't apply to a student on a university campus, but it does apply to any young person. And students who live in a single unit close to a university who have a power bill in their name will get that electricity credit.
On another note, obviously the Premier mentioned WA's relationship with China this morning. However, does the budget include any policies relating to Australian engagement, West Australian engagement with Indonesia or other Asian nations?
Well, look, our focus in this budget is on cost of living, health, housing, and tackling climate change. But on that issue, the Premier's been clear that we want strong, positive relationships with our Asian neighbours. It's critical for continuing to grow our economy.
What should multicultural West Australians know about the new budget?
Well, I think multicultural West Australians should know what all West Australians know, is that this budget ultimately is about our strong financial management, our delivery of surpluses, which means that we can invest in key infrastructure in Western Australia. So every West Australian will understand from this budget that we're making record investment in health, an additional $2.7 billion, or that's from 2021, an additional $10 billion in the system. So for every West Australian who understands that we need the strongest health system we can have, particularly coming out of a COVID pandemic, then this investment means significant improvements to deliver for West Australians.
Hi there. Are you looking for a new home or want to refinance your car mortgage to get a better rate? At AA Finance Solutions, we have the expertise and knowledge to help you to find the right loan for your needs and budgets. Contact us today. Let us help you to make your home ownership dream a reality.
AA Finance Solutions, your local mortgage broker.
A protest was held this afternoon outside the Banksia Hill Detention Centre following recent outbreak of juvenile riots. Activists strongly criticised the way the authorities have handled the situation, claiming guns were pointed towards juveniles during the riots. A human rights lawyer who is heading a class action against the McGowan government has accused the Premier of taking advantage of the situation politically. Most of the juveniles involved in the disturbance this week will face criminal charges.
To the children, it's brutal to the families, and it's unacceptable. Show some heart, show some leadership, and show some kindness. It's really important that happens, because if you feed hate, you'll receive hate. If you give love, you'll give love. You'll receive love. It's that simple.
A man was left with facial injuries after attempting to stop a thief from stealing his car in Carlisle. Authorities have released CCTV footage in a bid to identify the wanted suspect. The incident happened at 10:50 p.m. on Wednesday at a petrol station on Orang Road. An unknown man entered a silver Toyota Camry while the owner was inside the service station. The victim then ran out of the store and opened the driver's side door to stop the man stealing the car. But the male suspect reversed the car and trapped the owner between the door frame. He was carried a short distance before he fell onto the ground, which caused a facial injury. The stolen vehicle is a 1996 silver Toyota Camry with a WA registration 9HM769. Detectives have released a picture of the wanted man and urged members of the public to contact Crime Stoppers.
Both the doctors and nursing unions says that the healthcare workforce have missed out in the WA government's latest budget. The Australian Medical Association of WA stated this week that junior doctors have missed out on better remuneration, while the Australian Nursing Federation of WA says the government's record investment in health only focuses on infrastructure and IT and lacks precision strategy for attracting and retaining nurses and midwives.
Queensland Government announced $20,000 for doctors to go to Queensland to work in their metro area and $70,000 per doctor to go to Queensland to work in their country areas. This was in response to New South Wales introducing incentives last year, and it shows that the incentives do work, they do pull doctors out of a state, and I call on the McGowan government to reconsider their position on an incentive for junior doctors in Western Australia to keep them here in Western Australia where we need them.
This announcement to the state budget is yet another slap in the face to nurses on the eve of International Nurses Day. The slogan for International Nurses Day is "Our Nurses, Our Future." Well, I can tell you that that future is looking pretty bleak at the moment. We have this government who stubbornly hold onto their one-size-fits-none wages policy, and all nurses are asking for is 5%, which is still below the level of inflation.
A charity event focused on raising support for WA's domestic violence victims has been held by a law firm in Perth earlier this week. Tang Law and Arana House Women's Refuge held the event, which aimed to raise $10,000 to provide legal support for women and children going through domestic violence. Arana House treats their clients with a side-by-side approach, providing emotional support, transport, advocacy and legal assistance. They help clients with lodging violence restraining orders, as well as understanding legal protocols, law terms and paperwork.
Make a huge difference. So $10,000 will go a long way, considering one social worker to assist with one restraining order application costs about $500. $10,000 at least should go a very long way to helping a lot of people flee abusive situations and remain safe.
Women that we serve to protect and our frontline staff are obviously at extreme risk. So many of them are not in a position where they're safe enough to speak publicly about their experiences. And as a result, Arana House has been doing this really important work for more than 30 years under this shroud of secrecy. So it's really important that we share the vital life-saving work that we're doing with the broader public, because without the public being aware of the scale, the magnitude of the problem right here in Boorloo, Perth, we can't make a tangible difference.
Meanwhile, in other community news, award-winning 5-4 mental health advocate Nigel Gold scoops another accolade this week for his work. Mr. Gold received the Community Category Prize at the Barbara Hocking Memorial Awards 2023 held by the Are You OK organisation. The announcement was made during the virtual awards ceremony this week. After the ceremony, Mr. Gold told WAMA News that he was humbled and honoured to be recognised for his efforts. He would like to reiterate the simple message to all that it's okay not to be okay, and it's okay to get help. And now here's AMA WA spokesman Dr. Andrew Miller with his weekly medical and news commentary.
Hi, thanks for your time and happy Mother's Day to all the mums out there. We live in a country which can afford a lot of things, and budgets are always about priorities, so it's good to see our state doing well with surplus coming in and also on a national level. Our health system's really struggling though, and the AMA has been calling for some time, along with other people, for increased investment in the things that we know work. So it was good to see some money going towards improving bulk billing rates in general practice, and also good to see some potential extra funds going towards the public hospitals. These systems, though, are still being drip-fed when there is a lot of backlog of work that needs to be done from well before when the pandemic started. We know the pandemic's still impacting on hospitals. We have over 2,000 people around the country in hospital, and that represents 3 or 4 medium to large size hospitals. So that's affecting the work that we do everywhere, and everything is slower and more expensive. Our society, though, can afford this. We're certainly spending plenty of money in the areas of construction and in military defence, eye-watering amounts of money. So when we say that budgets are about priorities, what we mean is that people should be able to turn up to public hospitals and have an elective operation done in a reasonable amount of time. They should be able to turn up to an emergency department and be seen in a safe amount of time and treated expeditiously. And they should be able to get an appointment at a general practitioner without having to wait for a long time. On all of those basic metrics, our system is not working because it doesn't have enough funding. Reinventing ways of trying to supply that care is not going to work unless you simply have the boots on the ground, which entails spending a fair bit of money. Luckily, we have it. Our governments are flush with it, and we need to stop playing these political games with healthcare. We need to prevent winners and losers from the system. And while there are some green shoots in both budgets in certain areas, it requires a bit of a rethink, mainly not thinking about health as an expense. Health and healthcare is an investment that is actually looking after our population in the same way as education is, looking after the next generations. So on this Mother's Day, let's just remember family, being healthy to enjoy all of these things is more important than the trinkets. Thanks for your time.
That was Dr. Andrew Miller's comment, and congratulations to Nigel for winning the Are You OK Awards as well.
Great job, Nigel. And now here's Madeline Lombardi with a special edition of Western Perspective at Parliament House, where she interviewed Anglicare WA CEO Mark Glasson over the McGowan government's budget response to the housing crisis.
Hello, this is Madeline Lombardi for Western Perspective. I'm here with Mark Glasson, CEO of Anglicare Western Australia. So Mark, demand for social housing and homelessness is on the rise, and current stats have revealed increased wait times for people seeking social housing in particular. After learning the state government will be investing $750 million into housing and homelessness, do you believe this will be enough to combat WA's state of living crisis?
It won't be enough to combat the crisis. It is enough to make a difference to a number of families. So we've got to put the investment into perspective. We have 19,000 or more people on the applications for social housing on the waiting list. That means nearly 40,000 people are waiting on that accommodation. This investment will not deliver anywhere near enough housing to fill that gap.
I want to know, do you think the government is combating the high construction wait time? So we know we're waiting a long time for these houses to be built at the moment as well. Do you think they're combating it correctly in this week's state budget that's been announced today?
I think what we need to be doing is to be committing to a long-term pipeline of work. What we have is a problem in Western Australia, and Australia in fact, which is many, many years in the making. You're not going to solve that problem and the scale of demand with one budget. What we were hoping for in today's budget was a commitment to a long-term funding pipeline, the establishment of a Western Australian Housing Future Fund that would allow us to commit money in perpetuity to the construction of housing. The demand for housing across Australia is the result of many years of underinvestment, and so we need to put tools in place to make sure that we don't repeat those mistakes. Our challenge to the government was to put in something that was long-term. They haven't been able to do that. If you focus on the long term, you can then increase and decrease investment according to the bumps and peaks and troughs in the cycle. But at the moment, we're in the trough, we can't get things built. No matter how much money you announce today, you will struggle to get them on the ground. If you commit to 20 years of funding that you can use as a lever to either stimulate or wind down the sector, then you've got something that will make a longer term difference.
So what you're saying is it's just almost like a short-term injection that's been happened in this budget instead of a long-term future investment plan that we want to see as the outcome.
Short-term thinking is what got us into this position. So what I want to be really clear about is that the investments that have been made will contribute housing to the stock. They will provide more housing for the people of Western Australia. Will they meet the need? No, because we have a long-term problem. So it's almost like a sugar hit. We'll get 700, 800 more houses, maybe a few thousand. If you combine all this government's commitments to housing, there's billions of dollars. And I want to acknowledge that, but it doesn't fix our long-term problem. A long-term problem needs us to think beyond the next horizon to what are we going to do in the next 20 years?
As opposed to sort of figures that we're dealing with now, looking beyond that. One thing that was spoken about today in the budget room was the energy injection that all West Australian residents would be receiving. So $400 energy relief bill to ease the cost of living, and 350,000 households who are in need will receive an $826 support payment. Do you believe this is enough for those in need, or should they receive more, is what I want to ask.
The people that are doing it really tough need more.
Yeah.
Okay? They need ongoing support. So what I would have liked to have seen was some sort of ongoing rent assistance to get us through the peak of this crisis that we're in. People who can't pay their rent now, people are foregoing food and medication and vehicle expenses to keep the roof over their head. Okay, and if you lose your house now, you're in a world of pain if you're facing other vulnerabilities. So what we would have preferred is to reinstate the rental relief scheme, which was brought in during the pandemic to ensure that people didn't lose their accommodation at that time. That would provide a real safety net for people. So the extra support going to families is very welcome. Is it enough to solve the issues that we're facing? It's not. Western Australia is facing a housing and cost of living crisis that we have never seen before, and that required a bold and ambitious budget, and that's not what we got.
I think what you were just saying there with that renting assist as well was something that the budget could have considered, definitely. There was a lot of talk, as what I just said there, about short injections into the budget, which will help us now as opposed to long-term future as well. Renting as well. I know that a lot of renters are too scared to even approach landlords about structural issues that are happening in their house as well. I don't know why today's budget didn't really consider the overarching effect of what it's like living as a renter within the West Australian market as well. So that's something that they could have considered.
I think our housing system is increasingly relying on private rental to keep the community housed. Okay, that's obvious right across the country, and what we're seeing is more people renting and renting for longer. When that is the case, we need to provide more assurance to renters and more protections to renters so that they aren't then subject to gouging when the market is strong as it is now. And we get to think about things like energy efficiency of rental houses. We get to think about quality of housing. We get to provision so that people can make those houses homes. So the ability to make minor changes to a property, to have a pet, the sort of things that most people in the community take for granted that aren't available to most of our renters. We need to provide protections to renters as well to make sure that if they choose to rent or if they're forced to rent, that they have some sense that this is my home.
It's these foundational issues that we need to tackle first. So thank you very much for speaking with me today. We appreciate it here on WAM News.
Thanks, Maddie. It's been a pleasure.
That was Maddie, and she will be back with us in the studio next week. And now, here's Leo Palisi with what's coming up on 6 News tonight.
Thanks, guys. On 6 News, questions about the leadership of Jeremy Rockliff and an early election as the now minority Tasmania Liberal government deals with 2 of its MPs quitting. Victoria Police condemn appalling scenes in Melbourne where neo-Nazis clashed with anti-racism protesters. And a Queensland woman missing in South Australia's Western Eye Peninsula for 7 days found alive. Watch live whenever you want on our YouTube channel and our website, 6newsau.com. For now, though, it is back to you.
Thanks, Leo. And that's our weekly news and current affairs, with the latest news on our website, wamnnews.com.au.
Don't forget to subscribe to the WAMN Extra News Club so we can continue our work in the community. Full details on wamnnews.com.au/news/extra. From Melly and myself, we wish you good health, good night. See you next Sunday.
Thanks for watching.